You are listening to Kubernetes Bytes, a podcast bringing you the latest from the world of cloud-native data management. My name is Ryan Wallner, and I'm joined by Bhavin Shah, coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. We'll be sharing our thoughts on recent cloud-native news and talking to industry experts about their experiences and challenges managing the wealth of data in today's cloud-native ecosystem. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. We're coming to you from Boston, Massachusetts. Today is April 27th, 2023. I hope everyone is doing well, staying safe, and let's dive into it. I know a lot of us in the community are fresh back from Kubecon Amsterdam, and I feel like I'm just recovering from my jet lag. For the most part, it's been a while since I've done the 6-hour difference. Last time I did that was, I think, Hawaii.
Oh,
if you
nice.
could actually, and that was like 10 years ago. So it's been a while since I did the 6-hour difference. And I know you, Bhavin, were visiting family. So how the hell was that?
I know. Like you're talking about 6-hour difference, right? Think
I know,
about nine and a half.
I shouldn't be complaining.
No, like usually I don't get jet lag. So, okay, actually, let me start from the beginning. I went to India to visit my family like 3 years late after meeting them. I think I was there in like February of 2020. That's when I got married. Came back and then the pandemic hit. So I hadn't seen them for a while. So it was great to like meet everybody in person, just hang out. Like I didn't choose to work from home. I was completely on PTO.
Good.
Had some great food. The only complaint was like it was so hot, dude. Like I don't know what the weather in Amsterdam was. I've heard mixed reviews that it was raining one day and it was hot. But it was so hot in Mumbai. Like it was hot and humid. So like the daily highs were like 98 or 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So I was staying put inside my house in front of the AC or below a ceiling fan for like 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. I was not moving. So
yeah, and that's like a sticky heat too. In Mumbai.
Yeah.
I've never been, but like, if it feels anything like Florida or anywhere in the Northeast when it's super humid, it's miserable.
Yep. The positive aspect, right? Like this is considered to be the mango season. Like I don't know if you have heard, like Indian mangoes are like really good. So yeah, I had a lot of mangoes in this trip, and this is like the first time since I came in the US. Yes. Yeah, there are some fruits that you get in India only. Like, for example, again, I don't know if this is the actual name, but chiku. It's a small brown fruit that looks kind of like a kiwi, but you only get it in India. It's like super sweet and it's really fun. Chikoo, I think.
Oh, chiku.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it does look like a...
kiwi. But like it tastes so good, and you don't get it here, even in the Indian stores that you have in the US. So that was fun, like eating mangoes and chikus. That was
another name for chiku is sapota.
Okay, I don't know in what language, but good to know.
It's a category of fruit that's like a mango. So there you go.
Okay, makes sense.
This is what the internet is telling me.
Just internet, not ChatGPT. Come on,
not ChatGPT. I don't know how much it knows about chikus. We can always ask it later.
Yeah, but yeah, that was my India trip. I had a lot of fun, but I'm happy to be back and excited for what's next.
Yeah, it's been quite a whirlwind. I know we did one show with Michael, and it was a great show about. We focused a lot on community and what they're doing and what our local meetup, Kubernetes Boston, is all about. So that was a lot of fun. We missed you though.
It was a great episode. Like I did listen to it. As soon as it came out, love the study groups that Michael runs for people to get their CKAs. I love the fact that you covered funding round for Honeycomb. I was like, yes,
I did. I said I had to do you justice and bring it to the table there. I probably didn't do as job as you did.
No. It was fun. As soon as I heard it, I was like, yes, let's go.
You got to bring it to the table. That is. Okay, so obviously no guest this week. We're back in the swing of things. The week after KubeCon, we always do a KubeCon review and or recap. Which includes generally, if we're at the show, we'll tell you what it's like to be there, which I'll give a little bit of my perspective. I've never been to Amsterdam before, so give you a little bit of background there. talk about a little bit of sort of the people that I felt like were there, some of the trends, and then there's a whole bunch of news. And Bhavin and I will kind of go back and forth with a lot of the highlights. We may not get to every single link that we have in our notes. Yeah, but we will make them available like we did last time in a document. They don't fit in the show notes. They don't let us put that many in there, so we'll probably do a Google Doc. But anyway, we'll put that in the show notes, and we'll do it that way. So let's start with Amsterdam. So the biggest thing I want to kind of talk about with the show itself was the energy level that was Kubecon EU this time around. A lot of people, if you have been to other Kubecons before, the last one in Detroit and previously in LA, it was not at the energy level. I mean, LA was abysmal, right? So I wasn't there, but I know a lot of people were, including yourself. It was tough. And then Detroit, we felt like we were getting there again, right? We still had a lot of pandemic stuff to worry about. And before that, before everything, was San Diego, which was a great show. And we feel like the energy is back to that San Diego level capacity. And it was one of the biggest shows, right? 10,000 people, completely sold out of tickets. So that was really exciting to see. I'm pumped to see what Chicago is like, as well as for folks who don't know, in 2024 in the spring, it'll be in Paris. Right? Yeah. So that'll be a lot of fun. I've also never been there. So I'd like to see what it's like, growing wise. And I know there's a different energy for EU versus North American. So anyway, the energy was back, which was a ton of fun. And
to answer your question about how will it be in Chicago, cold. Like it's Chicago in November.
Yeah, Chicago in November. We talk a lot too, like internally about sort of who made that decision, but it's no one from the Chicago area in November. I'll tell you that much. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe they're just spreading some love for their November city. It could be hit or miss, right? We had this happen in Detroit when normally it's supposed to be a lot colder, and we got great. Yeah. So you never know. Let's be optimistic. Chicago is a very cool city, so that will be.
It is. Okay.
So Amsterdam as a city, I think it was a great place for KubeCon. If you've never been, it's a very, I say, very short city. Not a lot of like huge skyscrapers. Very kind of walkable. Every street in the city is like a bunch of rings, so it's you can pretty much get everywhere on foot. That being said, there was a lot of guidelines around how to get around the city, and if you don't know, right, if you just Google Amsterdam, you'll get pictures of bicycles, because bicycles are absolutely the way to get around, and there's a whole etiquette to learn, which you can only learn so much in a week. But basically the rule of thumb that I learned is that bikes stop for nothing. It's like taxis in New York City. They will plow you down, and to the point where I saw a bike as I was walking with my wife. She came along with me. I was walking, and a bike hit a person like waiting for fries or something. Because fries are very popular in Amsterdam, and he hit the wrong guy. And the guy chased him down, pulled him off his bike, and started wailing on him in the middle of the street. And I was like, "Oh my, I'm not riding a bike. Never mind."
It's awesome.
We did ride a bike after that. I will say, the locals, all stepped in to like end it. But basically, bikes will not stop for anything. And if you're on the bike, be careful not to hit the wrong guy. It was a very once in a I'm sure a lot of occurrence, but I happened to be there, and it scared the pants off me. So
as you were describing Amsterdam and the bikes and how people should know what they're doing, I don't know if you watched Ted Lasso, Ryan, but the latest episode of Ted Lasso, they did an away game in Amsterdam.
Okay. I haven't.
The owner was walking on one of the bike lanes only street.
Oh yeah.
And she got basically toppled over from one of those bridges into the canal. And
accurate. Accurate right there. That is an accurate thing. You're in the wrong spot walking, you will know about it. And you will be it's not like everywhere else where like the walking gets sort of priority.
Dedicated lanes.
Bikes get priority. Even so, cars will stop for you, bikes won't. But cars also stop for bikes, not the other way around.
Okay.
And occasionally you'll get, because there's also really tiny cars there.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like here in the US where everything's huge.
No
There's
F-150s.
tiny cars, and some of them ride in the bike lanes, and so you definitely don't want to buy one of them. Anyway, it's a whole thing, but it was actually a fun part of the experience. Yeah, exactly. Awesome. So I'm also a very big dog fan, and dogs are everywhere in the city. I don't know what it is, and they're allowed in everywhere. Right. So like if you're not a dog person, Amsterdam might be tough. I'll just put it out there because there's dogs everywhere. They're allowed it everywhere, like restaurants, everything. So it was kind of fun. But anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on the actual city, but it was a lot of fun. If you were there, I'm sure you had similar experiences. If not, we'd love to hear about them. Yeah. Now, as far as the show goes, right, before we dive into some of the announcements, I do want to say that I felt like there was a lot of first timers at Kubecon, and maybe this was due to the size and restrictions being completely lifted. I didn't expect this entirely, just because travel is hard, budget and those kind of things. A lot of people are having a hard time traveling through their company, but there was a lot of first timers, and maybe this is in Europe. It's easier to get to and from places without a plane ticket, per se. Maybe that made it easier. Maybe it didn't. I'm not sure, but there was a lot of first timers there, which meant there was a lot of sort of educational questions and learning and things like that. Not to say that there weren't a lot of people outside of that discovery phase. There were still a lot of customers that were well beyond their journey. So to me, that means like a lot of the early adopters are there who are like living it and breathing it and consuming it and have different problems. And then you have a whole new set of laggers, right? The bigger organizations, the financials, all those who have like huge legacy systems that are now coming in and are like learning about things like data on Kubernetes. And they're saying, well, like, oh, someone told me not to run my database. And then you ask like, well, what database are you running? Like a SQL Server and Oracle database, right? And you're like, of course, because, you haven't fully adopted like microservices and DevOps and there's a whole thing that you're skipping here. So I felt like there was sort of those two spectrums of conversations and not a ton in the middle. So, that was my observation, obviously. Personal accounts, anecdotal for me here. And beyond that, I think the last thing I'll talk about before we'll dive into a few things is trends. At every show, we talk about things that are often buzzing. People talk about a lot. A lot of them shouldn't be too surprising. Cost and security and multi-cloud are still a huge portion of that. I think cost was even more so, maybe even top of the list. For me, in terms of certain conversations and sort of seeing what's going on, a lot of because of what's going on economically, right? There's a direct correlation between infrastructure and cost and what to do there. Surprisingly, that doesn't mean people are just like repatriating, right? Although we do hear a lot about that. I think we even did a somewhat of an episode on that topic. But we also see a ton of people using multiple clouds to kind of spread their costs around and really care about monitoring and those kind of things. The other unsurprising one was AI. It just was, even though there was, only so many specifics, it was, it's taking off as a whole thing. And then the show as a whole, which was the most surprising to me, probably because I don't have a ton of experience working in the field, is the sustainability aspect, right? It was a big part of like certain keynotes and projects and things like that, around sort of how to use infrastructure, cloud native infrastructure in a sustainable manner, right? Things like energy consumption and monitoring and sort of cost of serverless and how to be better about that. It was kind of a fun way to look at certain problems that we don't often look at. So that I did appreciate that as well.
I had a question on cost, right? And since you were there, like maybe you can give a first-hand experience. Were people talking about cost because like I have two suggestions, right? Like they were looking at Kubernetes to reduce costs with their legacy infrastructure, and they're like, okay, if I move to Kubernetes, that gives me certain capabilities that helps me reduce cost. Or the second one was, oh, I went all in Kubernetes, spent a lot of money, and now I need to scale back my infrastructure. So I'm looking for solutions that can help me optimize how I run my Kubernetes clusters.
Yeah, the conversations I had were more of the latter. Like I'm using these types of tools and platforms, and how can I use them more efficiently?
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay, that makes sense.
And sometimes that means like caring about physical server. Sometimes that means comparing cost of one provider versus the other.
Yep.
Something that I think was interesting to me was sort of still the trend towards people don't want to build their own Kubernetes anymore, right? Also, not surprising, right? This was something Joe Beta and everybody sort of acts as if we want to make Kubernetes boring because we care about everything that's happening on top of it. And I think we've seen that trend even in Detroit. We saw that trend. But the Amazons, the AKSs, and the OpenShifts of the world are still top three when it comes to working. But you definitely see a little bit of I'm already in it. How do I make this more cost effective?
Okay. How do I make it better?
That being said, it the other side of that was also there, but not as prevalent.
Gotcha. And then I guess one of the buzzwords that I was surprised you didn't mention already was platform engineering. Was that a topic around the show, on the show floor, or it's mostly on Twitter?
Yeah, not like at Detroit, which was, I think, because the folks behind the messaging of platform engineering used some pretty risque DevOps is dead, right? That kind of thing. So that was a bigger buzz, I think, in Detroit. Platform engineering for me went from Detroit as like purely a buzzword of like what is going on to how do we do something with that term, right? And so it was still there. There's still a lot of talk about those terms. People are have jobs with those with platform engineering titles and things like that now. So it's definitely here to stay, and I think that community is the next step that I saw was just getting meat behind it. I know we had spoke to Luca, and I spoke with him at the conference as well, and that's really where the community is like putting meat on the bone, so to speak.
No, I think talking about putting meat on the bone, right? I think Spotify Engineering did publish a blog around. Obviously, they were the ones that came up with Backstage, and they shared some metrics around like what are the benefits of developers that use Backstage a lot versus developers who don't use Backstage as much. The increase in developer productivity, the increase in developer satisfaction, so like job retention, and the increase in the pace with which they are producing code. So there are definitely benefits to it for the adopters that have already like that are all into platform engineering. But it was good to see. Let's see how these trends show up or mature or evolve till we hit Chicago in like the next 6 months.
It'll definitely be exciting. I personally am a fan of that community.
For sure,
absolutely. Not everybody is, but I like the term. I like what it represents and sort of the evolution of sort of where it represents in DevOps. So
gotcha.
I mean, I don't think I'm forgetting anything. I'm sure I am actually, of being physically at the show, but I think we can switch and dive into a few announcements. Why don't you start up with a couple? You have more than I do listed here anyway.
Sure. I had to catch up, right? Like I wasn't there in person. I was like, shit, I need more responsibility. I need to come up with more articles. I think just a few easy ones to start with. I'll do a couple and then hand it back to you for like to go one-on-one through our lists. But Kubernetes 1.27 is out. Like I know this is not a KubeCon thing, but I really like the name Chill Vibes. Like that's what the release is called. I'm sure it gave people chill vibes, hopefully, when they try to upgrade it. But no, it has a lot of new enhancements, a few features or things that you should keep in mind is new images, like the 1.27 images won't be posted on the old registry. So I know we have covered it many times on the pod, how it's not kubernetes.gcr.io. Now it's a new container registry for images. 1.27 images are not even pushed to kubernetes.gcr.io. Another interesting thing that applies to us, or our audience at least, the read write once pod, which is just one of the access ways, has now moved into beta. So like was alpha for a while, now it's beta, so it can be used by people that want to try it out without having to enable the feature flag when they install Kubernetes. And then one last quick major update in 1.27 was if you are looking to upgrade or update the amount of resources a specific container in a pod has, now you can do that without having to actually restart the entire pod. So like if a pod has 3 containers, you just want to edit the resources for one of those, it can do it on its own rather than having to take down the other 2 containers that coexist in the same pod. So those are like 1.27 updates. And then
there's a bunch of if you are from our general audience of volumes and storage, there are a bunch of relevant things, such as like the removal of certain APIs, like expand CSI volumes, CSI inline volumes, group snapshots now I think in beta. Anyway, go to the link that we have here and kind of search for what's going on, and just search for the term volume, because there's actually a ton in here if you're working with data. So I just wanted to add that little mark there.
No, agreed. Like I think this release had like 60 enhancements. So obviously we won't cover all. So go to the link, find the thing that applies to you. Yep. And then I just wanted to talk or highlight the Cube interview that Audi did around how they are implementing Kubernetes and how they're using it. The reason I want to highlight it is the guest used an interesting term where Audi actually embraces the silos. Like they don't want people to spend time eliminating or breaking down silos and spend 80% of the time doing that. They want to actually automate everything that's done inside a specific silos, and then make the organization faster as a whole unit, and then they can worry about breaking down the silos. But the message was completely opposite to like what you would usually hear. The message from Audi was, embrace the silos and don't spend most of your time just worrying about breaking them down.
Keep those walls up. Maybe it's like, well, we couldn't break them down, so just keep them up.
I know. Over to you, Ryan.
Sure. So the one that I found pretty interesting in the world of Kubernetes and data and storage was the announcement from Veritas, who announced a SAN for Kubernetes at Kubecon, right? So this is Veritas InfoScale, I believe it's called. Really a block storage that is sort of aimed at Kubernetes, deployed cloud native. They compare it to a lot of the players in this space, like Portworx and Longhorns and the ones that are native or in the CNS space. So it just kind of caught me as wow, this is a company like this is really embracing that CNS capability, and I think it just kind of shows that there's a need to kind of move and adopt this space, and that there's still a huge push for that CNS capability, even with like larger companies with full blown SAN solutions and things like that. So we'll put the article in there. I haven't really tried it or looked too much into it, but definitely.
Seems like a good article. Like at least when I clicked on the notes right now as you was talking, and interesting that Veritas puts effort behind building a software SAN. So definitely worth a look.
16 nodes is the max you can do. It says in the article. So it's definitely early days, right? With anything, but we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, for sure. I think next, I would like to talk about something around security. So intent-based access control. I know we always talk about role-based access control, but there is a new startup called Authorize, and they're trying to use a pun, like it's authorize, but they have an otter for the mascot, so it's Authorize. I'm hoping I'm doing justice to, and people on the audio can actually get it. But yeah, they are talking about how they use or implement intent-based access control, where you can have these intent definitions in YAML files where you can specify what part of the app should talk to a different part of the app, and you define that, and then regardless of the actual network policy management layer that you have underneath it, or like one of the examples I've also used is if you deploy Kafka, you want specific part of your app to talk to that Kafka broker. You can just specify that in an intent file, and then they do all the plumbing underneath the cover. So it makes the whole process of following the principle of least privileges easier. So that was another startup. I think I don't know how we missed it, but they raised 11.5 million in seed funding. And
nice.
So they're definitely working on this open source project, which I think they plan to submit to CNCF as a sandbox project. But then they also have like a cloud platform that I think they'll build out using the money that they have raised. And then
very, very cool.
Talking about intent-based access control, right? We can't forget our old friend role-based access control. And the reason I bring it up is because there was a new vulnerability called RBAC
Yeah.
Buster.
RBAC Buster. I love the name. I know I comment on the name of things a lot, but that was a good one.
Yeah, I know. They actually, I don't know. They did think about it instead of just going with the first thing that came to their mind. But it is about how hackers can use a method where they get into your cluster through typo squatting and just using asking you to pull down different images which look similar from a public Docker registry. So Kubernetes .io/kube controller becomes Kubernetes, which is misspelled, and kube dash controller. So like it looks close enough that people might actually pull it down and then have it on their clusters. And once they are in the door, they can go ahead and create these cluster roles and cluster role bindings, so that even if you fix the vulnerability or fix the front door, they are still in your cluster, and then they hijack your resources for some Monero crypto mining, which is difficult to catch. So IBAC, RBAC, whatever you use, make sure you're secure.
Yeah, and the other thing that I took from reading about that RBAC Buster was the initial access was through a misconfigured API server.
I know.
Which is just like, I know we've done a lot on security on this podcast, especially recently, and misconfiguration, right, it was one of the tops. And actually VMware put out like the state of Kubernetes, and it's the top security thing that comes out here. And the what this boils down to is like, we have to adopt automation and take out the middleman of like human fingers, where it's not always going to solve the problem, but like we should be using this as a big old flag to say, if misconfigured things are the biggest vulnerability for attacks like these or just other things going on, it is imperative we get some control over that. So interesting that once they got in there, they set up basically near admin privileges with a cluster role, and it didn't look much different, other than the fact that I think I read something about it spins up a whole bunch of daemon sets to use the resources. I feel like that you'd probably notice a little easier, but I forgot how many clusters they kind of showcased were affected, but it wasn't a small number.
I know. Yeah. Don't leave your doors and windows open. Like anybody can get in. Like fix that problem first. Then make sure all your furniture is aligned properly and it's secure. Nice. I think, do you have something next, or should I continue?
Go again.
Okay, so I have a couple of smaller startups. I know like Kubecon is always interesting for me because big vendors obviously make their announcements, but sometimes the really cool features come from like smaller companies. So one of them called ngrok. They are a reverse proxy startup. Again, I think this is another funding round that we missed, dude. Like I need to step up my game, but they raised their Series
I think it deserves its own show still. I think it might need its own show.
Yeah, they raised Series A worth like $50 million 5 months back, but they are a reverse proxy startup that helps users connect their Kubernetes clusters together and like apps to their Kubernetes cluster. They just introduced an ingress controller for Kubernetes, which basically makes it easier for people to install the reverse proxy on their Kubernetes cluster. So like not great, like not something like out of the like that blows my mind, but it's something that reverse proxies are becoming an important thing, right? Like instead of having to install or worry about certificates, having a reverse proxy, making that secure tunnel. I know Teleport does a lot of these things in the security ecosystem as well. So another startup to look out for. I think they're San Francisco based as well, so local to the US. And then staying on the West Coast, going up north in Seattle, like Diagrid, right? Like one of those vendors that made a lot of noise maybe a couple of KubeCons back, like that, and they had the whole Dapper Day. They added new features to their Diagrid controller, which is a fully managed service that you can use to run Dapper in production. So they added features like app visualizer. They have a really neat UI where you can actually see how your app is built and running. They have an advisor. They enabled certificate rotation and management. And then, as you said, right, the theme for KubeCon was again around the cost optimization piece. So even Diagrid added a cost optimization tab in their UI where for connected clusters, it can show you enhancements.
Yeah, big news there.
But go ahead, Ryan. On to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I did want to talk about, which I thought was very cool,
Mm-hmm.
again, the focus on education, right?
Yeah.
In this KubeCon was definitely obvious, and I love to see that because as we advance and kind of keep talking about new feature this, new feature that, and with every release it gets more complicated.
It is.
Education becomes key, and our friends over at Castin Veeam have something called the Cube Campus,
Yeah.
and they did actually a lot of great sort of training and sessions and that kind of thing. But I did want to call out they did announce like the capability to start partnering
Nice.
with Cube Campus. So it's not just like a Cast and Vive thing anymore.
Yeah.
It started out that way, but it's kind of grown and morphed into a bigger thing. I know I had conversations with them about potentially putting stuff on that site, and I just
Mm-hmm.
love to see sort of that organic need and sort of want to build and more educational material from the community. So really cool stuff. If you
Yeah.
haven't checked out Cube Campus, they have a whole ton of really great training and labs and those kind of things. I think it's worth calling out and definitely checking out if you're in that phase of kind of digging in and you're the hands-on type
Yeah.
of person that learns.
And I think if I remember correctly, like even at KubeCon Detroit, in the 5 minute sponsored keynote that each platinum sponsor or diamond sponsor, whatever the top level is, gets, they did highlight Cube Campus. Like they want
Yeah,
everybody in the community to get familiar with the Kubernetes concept so that everybody can choose their own path, but getting people started with the right set of skills and tool sets is important. So yeah,
yeah, absolutely.
cubecampus.io for people that are looking to learn about Kubernetes.
Yeah, go check it out.
For me, I think a couple of additional news. Isovalent, I know the company that built Cilium, which is now the default CNI
Mhm.
for almost all the managed services, Kubernetes services. They announced something called Cilium Mesh. So Cilium Mesh basically connects your Kubernetes workloads with traditional workloads or physical servers that are running either on-prem or in the cloud. So you can have a virtual machine, you can have a physical server, you can be running that on-prem or in the cloud, but you can use this Cilium mesh and for your Kubernetes clusters, you don't need to install anything new. But for these traditional parts of your application stack, you can install something called as a transit gateway that allows you to connect your traditional apps that still haven't been modernized to the modern apps that you're running on your Kubernetes cluster. So that was a cool feature that I wanted to highlight. Maybe people can try it out in their environments or in their cloud
I feel like
environments.
I feel like mesh is becoming one of those terms that you just tack on to the end
Yeah.
of your product name, and now you have something new, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not taking away from what Cilium Mesh is,
Yeah,
but
yeah. No,
I
agreed.
just love
Like,
that mesh term.
I almost ignored this announcement because I was like, yeah, well, maybe it's just another service mesh. Like, don't
Yeah.
need to focus on it. But then I got the point where like they have a transit gateway that works with other components. I was like, okay, that makes it cool enough to be included in the news section.
Yeah, absolutely. Something network related, right? Is you see the term mesh and you
Mm-hmm.
automatically will go there. Cool. So another one I had here was if those are familiar with the Dragonfly in memory
Mm-hmm.
database data store. I'm personally not, but really kind of an interesting project. They have a GitHub repository here, but basically the announcement from them is a brand new operator. Operators, and the reason I bring this one up is operators were also a huge topic,
Yeah.
right? I think this goes hand in hand with the fact that we see sort of the adoption phase moving towards do things for me like build my Kubernetes cluster, run my
Yeah.
Kubernetes cluster. We also see the same trend for applications
Mm-hmm.
that are developing operators. They're definitely becoming the de facto. If someone's looking to run something, they're probably going to look to see if that thing has an operator first. At
Yeah.
least that seems to be the way people are going to kind of migrating to. So
Mm-hmm.
this was from Dragonfly, again, an in-memory data store for developers. So if you haven't checked that out, I think some pretty interesting stuff in their GitHub repository that you can poke around at.
And I agree, right? Operators are the way to go. Like, I think the episode that you and I did was like back in 2021, like when,
Yeah.
again, operators were prevalent then, but they still were like kind of new, but now everything is operator based. And as you
Yeah.
said, like people do look for operator as the first option to deploy things. If you're not, like, start looking at operators, dude. Like, you should not be deploying individual deployments or pods. It should be operator based.
Yeah,
But yeah,
I think we're definitely getting to that point, right? 2 years has made a big
yeah,
difference. That's for
for
sure.
sure. I think a couple of different announcements. Cloud Casa, a vendor in the Kubernetes data
Yeah,
protection
that's right.
ecosystem. I know there were news maybe a couple of months back that they were spun out of Catalogic and now they're looking for funding. But now they have actually added something that can be useful for uh, people that are using the open source project Valero. So like Cloud Casa has added a UI where they can import or they can connect to their Valero installation. They can start managing them through the user interface. One gotcha that I found was it is generally available. It has a free tier if your Kubernetes cluster has 15 worker nodes. If you go above that, I think it's like $200 a month per node or per cluster. I'm not so sure, but yeah, there is a free tier which should work for most of the people that were using Valero as that open source backup tool. But yeah, a vendor adds something.
Yeah, I think they got a lot of great noise from this effort, right? Just kind of
Okay.
focusing on an open source tool. I mean, they've had sort of their backup as a service product for a while, which is
Yeah.
like underneath the covers, still based on some Valero plus some other stuff.
Yep.
And now they're kind of saying, well, if you're using Valero, we know this is a favorite in the community. It's open
Mm-hmm.
source. A lot of people can use it. We're just gonna allow you to start like visualizing and using those things from Cloud Casa, which I think is very cool, right?
Yeah.
Even to say that if you already are using the tool and you want to use this thing, you can import them, right?
Yeah.
You can say, here are my existing backups, which I think is a really great sort of tip of the hat to
Yeah.
sort of what the community and maybe how they're viewing sort of the efforts, which I think is just awesome. So I know they got we were quite far away from them. I personally was in the show
Mm-hmm.
floor, but I heard all about sort of what
Okay.
they were doing with
Nice.
Valero. So definitely some cool stuff. I think kudos to them on sort of making this happen for users of Valero.
Yeah, and going from a startup, I think next let's talk about Cisco. I think in
Yeah.
KubeCon Detroit, like Cisco had a really big booth, but all they did was give out branded hoodies to people. I think that people confused them for like the swag collection center. But now for this KubeCon, I think they did introduce three different open source projects around the security and space. So like VM Clarity, which allows agentless detection and management of software bill of materials. So that's one. NASP, NASP. It's a new project to provide like service mesh type capabilities for non-cloud on endpoints. So maybe going for that edge locations. And then media streaming mesh. I don't really know what this does, but that was a third project, so I had to say its name at least. But yeah, Cisco making some moves in the open source ecosystem.
Very, very cool. Kind of going back to the cost and things like that. Grafana Cloud basically announced a bunch of updates to Kubernetes monitoring, and I think this is also again still related to cost, but also monitoring observability. Huge topic, right? Huge
Mm-hmm.
topic. I think the more people are using clusters, the more people are putting applications. This is an obvious thing to start caring a lot more about. And specifically, some of the things they added were things like predictions,
Mm-hmm.
historical information, and those kind of things, which I think, initial efforts that we saw a few years ago were just visualizing what
Yeah.
was there, what was being sort of consumed or used. And now we're moving on to kind of predicting some usage or predicting costs and those
Yeah.
kind of things. I'm finding that that transition of monitoring tools and those kind of things are starting to look a lot more like that. And then everybody loves Grafana. A little part of your heart, if,
I
at the
know.
very least, we're in this ecosystem at least. So very cool stuff. I think I
Mm-hmm.
haven't personally used Grafana Cloud or anything like that, but I've
Yeah,
used a lot of Grafana
for sure.
deployed to Kubernetes. So very cool stuff.
Nice. And then I think I have a last couple of topics for me. One, let's do the security one first, and then we'll close out with a storage startup. So Aqua Security, they have a new version of Trivi that came out during the week of KubeCon, which now provides full compliance scanning for CIS benchmarks. So I know there are a lot of benchmarks that people or organizations like to comply with. I know we have the CIS standards, we had the NSA hardening guide. NSA hardening guide was something already something that Trivi used to do. Now I think they have added the full CIS Kubernetes benchmark suite. So you can just download the CLI tool, run it against your cluster. It will give you a result of what to fix to be compliant to this new benchmark, or not new, but to this CIS Kubernetes benchmark.
Sure. Yeah.
And then finally, I think the funding round that I wanted to talk about are the Kubernetes storage startup Volumes. They announced a Series A funding of $20 million. So again, still pretty small, but again, as I think Ryan, we had spoken about the next
We brought
wave,
up
and then
volumes or volume Z. We couldn't decide on how it was
I'm just going to call
pronounced.
it volumes.
And when they came out of stealth, I think we
Yeah.
had mentioned them a little
Yeah,
bit.
so now they officially have some money that they wanted to show people, and then I think the one-liner for them is they provide a web-based interface which customers can use to provision NVMe block access storage for Linux-based and Kubernetes applications. And this was a copy-paste from their blog, so I didn't know what they did.
Yeah, and I'm still torn on the name, right? I think are they going for like a Gen Z, Volume Z thing going on, right? They're like,
I didn't think about
early,
that.
late to the. I don't know. I'm connecting dots that probably aren't there, but
Yeah, you can only connect dots looking back. Isn't that one of the Steve Jobs quotes?
yeah, that's how it is. The last thing I will end on, I did mention it earlier in the show, which was the State of Kubernetes 2023 ebook from VMware, and I did wind up taking time to download it and read it. I think there's some really good information in there. I mentioned sort of the misconfigurations as sort of some of the top security concerns. Concerity, it's just blend them all together. Again, that was leading, right? And sort of down there is like unpatched CVEs and failed compliance, secrets management, etc. But they go beyond just talking about those things, right? They talk about sort of what I think from the business side, people are, organizations are getting out of it versus what are the most commonly used. I think it's well put together. And worth a read. So we'll definitely put a link to that in there as well. So yeah, we have now been talking for about 40 minutes on Kubecon things. We don't want to, dive into every single piece of news here, but we will include everything that we talked about and more in some show notes.
Yeah.
And before we leave, we always do a chat GPT section.
Yes.
Which, I don't know. What I asked it because we're doing KubeCon. I didn't know if it had anything, related to KubeCon meets stores or anything like that. But I asked it basically, if you were to attend a Kubernetes conference, what would be your priorities during the conference? And it basically answered, hey, I'm not a person. I can't really suggest that I have a personal preference.
Disclaimer.
But I can suggest some priorities about somebody else who is human, I think is what it's trying to say about attending a Kubernetes conference to consider. And they're fairly generic, like attending the keynotes and speeches, attending technical sessions and workshops, connecting with the community, visiting the expo hall, participating in Q&A and panels, which, it just assumes that you can do that. Very, very easily. Attending social events. These are all things that, clearly are just kind of scraped off, attending things. But I went a step further. I said, all right, so if you were to go to a party, a social event, what would you focus on? And I was really hoping it would say like, pound down the Mai Tais or something like that, but it didn't. It said, to engage in small talk, which I actually like these answers, right? It says attend those after parties, participate in the group activities, use social media, and the last thing it says, which I really is the reason why I'm talking about this, because it was a little bit of a boring of an answer, but it was the fact that social events and technology are meant to be fun and engaging and to be open to those new experiences. And I think that one line is probably all I really took away from its answer, but it's so true, right? When you go to these events, it really is a big difference from trying to consume from your couch or your office or whatever, your laptop. It makes a big difference, and connecting with the community in person, face to face. If you can, if you're lucky enough to do so, go and be able to enjoy those experiences, put yourself out there. And I think a lot of opportunities and networking at these events is so true. So you got it right there, ChatGPT, I'd say. But who knows?
I think, Ryan, to add to your thing, right? Like for people who couldn't make it to Amsterdam because maybe they didn't have enough PTOs, they didn't have enough budget for the travel. I wanted to highlight, like, okay, there is one in Chicago, but the podcast that you did with Michael last time, right? Like there are local communities that are still so valuable that have champions that want to engage and that want to help you. So if you're not able to go to a KubeCon, go open meetup.com, find your local Kubernetes chapter or Kubernetes meetup, and go and talk to the people there. And there might be some social events after to attend.
Absolutely. And I go as far as to say that you may often get more out of one of those small, intimate events than you do at a giant show. I mean, the giant shows are fun and good to keep up with trends and kind of what's going on, but you're doing it at a different level versus, a small 30-person meetup or a 10-person community going after a single goal. You'll have better conversations, and it's sort of the lifeblood of the larger community that is Kubernetes and Cloud Native. So go get involved.
For people that don't know, I think Ryan literally took the shot at me because I haven't been to the Boston Kubernetes meetup yet, and I looked at the next one and shit, like that I have a conflict for that one too. So maybe in June I'll make it, but I'm sorry, Michael, but I'm looking forward to meet you soon.
Which the next one is
May 11th.
Next week. Yeah. Oh, 11th. That's right. Yeah. I will be there, barring any major changes. But I plan to be there. If you are local to Boston, given you're listening to a podcast where the hosts are from Boston, tell us. We'd love to meet you and talk about if you have a topic for the show. That's a great way to kick it off. But anyway. I think we can wrap it up. What do you say? I think that was a pretty good overall gist of it. Hopefully our listeners, you have gotten enough out of it. And, with that brings us to the end of another episode of Kubernetes Bytes. I'm Ryan.
I'm Bhavin.
And thanks for listening to another episode of Kubernetes Bytes. Thank you for listening to the Kubernetes Bytes podcast.